Hi everybody, it's Pete here from See Your Toes again. This is podcast number 13, and for the first time I have a guest speaker. Today we've got a chap called Mike. He's a registered dietitian in the United Kingdom, and he's a little bit different in the dietitian space because he is personally keto, meaning he's low carb, high fat. Today we talk about quite a few things, including mental health and how diet can be affected by mental health. We talk about the pharmaceuticals industry. There's all sorts of things we chat about. I hope you enjoyed today's episode and I hope you get something out of it. If you want to find out more about Mike, then go to the show notes, the discussion. I'll have his X address written on that. Right, sit back and enjoy. Thank you. So the topic of today is whatever you want to make it, really. I personally, from my perspective and from the perspective of what I believe are the genre of my listeners, all 5 of them, would be primarily how what you do affects people. We all know there's a lot of pretty screwed up people out there, dietary wise and mental wise, and we also, you and I both know that diet can, and exercise of course, can hugely help in both of those instances. Getting that word out there and people thinking that you're just carrying on about not eating this and not eating that and you're miraculously going to change your world around, people find that very hard to believe, of course. So it would be, I think it's just an interesting topic is all.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, I think you are right. Even though a lot of doctors still have trouble sort of connecting the dots between nutrition and mental health, which is a shame really, because, we've got enough mechanistic data, mechanistic studies, and slowly, there are more sort of randomized control trial type studies coming out showing that, okay, if we improve people's diet, their mental health does improve. And one of the mechanisms there that I think is fascinating, has made a difference for me, is, if you lower the carbohydrate content of somebody's diet and you lower it enough, eventually, obviously, the body starts producing ketones. And then once that happens, the gut microbiome, we know it changes in composition. And then the knock-on effect is your brain produces more GABA. Now, interestingly, without GABA, you can't relax. You can't switch off. You're just perpetually in this stressed, anxious state. And obviously, if you were there chronically, that's what, one of the ways that it can lead to depression and, or anxiety, obviously. And so that's really, really fascinating. And we see this play out, and that mechanism has been studied in rats at least. And so we know that, okay, ketogenic diet, brain GABA goes up. And obviously, theoretically, we know what that's supposed to do. And like I said, there are a few human trials that have shown that if you take people with various mental health issues, not just anxiety and depression, but also things like schizophrenia, bipolar, these kinds of conditions that previously have been thought to be untreatable, things improve. And it's not to say on the more serious side of that coin, obviously schizophrenia doesn't go away, but it improves and they reduce their medications and they become a bit more functional. On the shallower end of that side of that coin, and this is what happened to me, kind of starting off panic attacks, anxious, depressed. I was on SSRIs, but 3 years later of a low carb diet, I'm not on SSRIs, I'm not anxious anymore, I'm not depressed anymore, I'm not on SSRIs anymore, 0 panic attacks. And it's well, why would that be? That's, if it was just me, I might think, it's probably a bit of a placebo here, but I know it's not just me. I know you've kind of had something similar. And, we talk to people on Twitter or on X, and loads of people are saying the same thing in terms of the mental health improved.
It's such a common thread amongst the keto carnivore community is I was screwed up. I was mentally screwed up. I've made this change in diet, and I have not immediately, but certainly over a period of time, have really come back together. And I know from how I felt, say, a decade ago, maybe a bit longer, I always said I wasn't depressed. I was just, what was the word I used? Basically, I was depressed, though. Depressed to me always sounded like an illness. Whereas if I said, well, I'm not depressed, I'm just sad all the time, then that's not an illness. That's just a way of a thought process. But looking back now, I spent a lot of my time in my 20s and 30s and 40s in a state of mild depression. And so it's such a relief now that I generally don't have any of those feelings. And when I do, it's normally because, like I said to you last time, it was a few weeks ago, I was at a trade show. So I was away for 3 nights and eating restaurant food, drinking lots of beer, just letting my hair down. I still didn't have desserts and stuff, but it was enough for me when I got back for about 3 or 4 days to just keep thinking, what's wrong with you? I just kept having those really negative emotions, those floods of, like you say, anxiety, where you just suddenly feel overwhelmed. Might only be for 30 seconds or something, but you think, where the hell did that come from? And then over time, of course, once I was back onto a good stable diet, they all buggered off and I got back to how I was.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, it's when there's, literally thousands of those kinds of stories, then this is why I don't understand why more doctors aren't at least curious, or more scientists aren't at least curious. Like, you've got, because people say, like, scientific people say, like, oh, but these are just anecdotes. And it's like, okay, but how many millions of anecdotes do you need before it becomes, do you know what I mean? Before it becomes
how
data.
Many anecdotes before it's actually reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, we just need one more. We're just not sure. The 1.5 million's not enough. We need 1.6 million.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the equivalent would be like reading a randomized control study about, okay, these 50 people did this and achieved this outcome, and then just going, that's just 50 anecdotes though. And it's like, like obviously not scientific thinking at all. And so obviously it will get studied. Like, I wrote an article recently about, mental health and ketogenic style diets, and a lot of the studies are yet to be done in humans. There are some not brilliantly controlled studies, but the interest is going up. We've got people like, I think his name's Christopher Gardner, I think on Twitter, who's kind of pushing it all in America. The brain energy guy. You've got people like Nick Norwitz, who's kind of pushing it as well, and at least having a conversation and getting this out there, because it does need to be studied, because at the end of the day, I know we talked about this last week, but at the end of the day, and I would say this to any doctor or anybody in healthcare or science who is completely skeptical about this whole thing, which is fine, but I would say to them, like, I understand the skepticism. However, look at the statistics in primary care across the nation, UK, US, any westernized country. Look at the statistics. Either what we're doing is not working, or we're not doing enough. So if we just keep doing more of what we've done in the last 30 years, we're going to get more of what we've got. Yeah. And we can all agree that won't be good. So
no,
at least have an open mind and think, even if somebody thinks, ketogenic diet, that's stupid, it's a waste of time. Okay, cool. Go do the study and prove it. Do you know what I mean? And I mean, people do try to prove it, but obviously it doesn't tend to go particularly well.
It's like I said in my last podcast, which was just me talking to myself. If you're depressed, go on a keto diet. Just get rid of all your carbs. Start eating healthy fats. Do it for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. What's the worst thing that can happen to you is that you've spent 2 or 3 weeks worth of food on nice healthy food. You've got rid of all that other crap. You've stopped eating pizza and donuts and full bloody sugar Coke and all of that. You might even have saved yourself a bit of money. And after 3 weeks, if nothing has happened, I know if you're depressed, getting out of bed in the morning can be, a major event, let alone having to change your diet. But that's the thing. What's the worst thing that can happen? It's not like you're going to come out of it with cancer or anything. You're probably going to come out of it healthier than you went in, even if you only do it for three or 4 weeks.
Absolutely, totally agree. I mean, for most people, there's more to gain than there is to lose. Definitely, like if you do the diet, even if you do it for 3 months, you're not going to die. If nothing changes, then cool, nothing changes. You've lost nothing. But what if everything changes, which it did for me, like back in 2018, for me, I was diagnosed, get this, I was diagnosed first with bipolar by my GP. I was then referred to a psychologist who diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder, which
wow.
I know, right? I hate that. It sounds awful. But that's what, and then I went to a private psychotherapist because I was thinking, well, they've told me two different things. Yeah. So I went to a private psychotherapist and paid, and she diagnosed with something called psychothalamic disorder. And I mean, that was, and by all accounts, like with all those three people, they all said, look, this will be lifelong. You'll just have to keep taking the medication. And, like long story short, it turns out they were wrong because I changed my lifestyle and I got off the medication. And, by all accounts now, like I don't, somebody might say, well, he doesn't have any mental health issues anymore. And it's like, well, how did that happen then? Anyway.
Footnote to any listeners, don't give up your medication just yet. Talk to your shrink first.
Yeah, definitely don't do it cold turkey. So a friend messaged me about this the other day because he's on SSRIs and he was like, oh, how did, he's asking me like, how did you get off them? Because he'd read all these horror stories online about people coming off SSRIs and having all these issues. And, like I said to him, I think where people might go wrong is trying to do it cold turkey, which is not what I did. I titrated the dose down. At the same time, I titrated my exercise up. I was changing my diet, more low carb, ketogenic, until it got to the point where the dose was so small, and actually this is how it happened for me, that I literally just forgot to renew my prescription. And then I got a text after about, I think it was 6 weeks from the GP saying, you've not had this medication for a month. Like, do you still want it? And at that point, I thought about it and I was like, I've been fine this past month. So I just never renewed it. And I mean, the sad thing is the GP never reached out to even ask, well, how have you done that?
Yeah, that's right. He probably assumed that you're buying them from someone else.
I mean, maybe they just assumed, he's probably a crackhead by now.
Yeah, that's right. He's found coke instead. Yeah. It's so you didn't get any sort of, when you're on even the low dose, you didn't find a placebo effect or anything like that. You just forgot to take it.
Yeah, for me, like I said, I was obviously working on the lifestyle stuff for like a whole year before that happened.
Yeah, okay. So there was from the start to at that point, what sort of time frame was it?
It was about 8 or 9 months because it was at the start of 2020 for me that I really went hard with the lifestyle stuff because, it wasn't in a good place. Obviously, lockdowns was happening and stuff. A friend of mine owns a gym, so I was going to the gym every day just to try to get some space from the kids and, being locked in the house, basically. And so that's when, I started sorting my lifestyle out. And, before Christmas, it was like October when that happened. I literally forgot to renew it. But I'd been on them since like 2017 maybe. And I had in the past, so like in, maybe that was 2018 or something, where I had stopped taking them and gotten worse and then had to go back, re-engage with the mental health team, like get another prescription. And then they were like, look, you can't stop taking it. And so I didn't for a while. But at that time where I stopped taking them and did get worse, my lifestyle was atrocious. Not exercise.
I could imagine.
Not exercising, drinking alcohol literally every day. Eating like crap. And people might be surprised at that because obviously I'm a dietitian. But at that time I was running a business
Hey, there's plenty of doctors out there that smoke like mad and drink like a fish. So
Yeah, and then look, in a weird way, it almost at this point it almost gives me superpowers with my patients, because when they talk to me, like, everybody's scared they're going to get judged, right? If somebody's obese or they're depressed or they're comfort eating or they're on drugs, and everybody's really scared that they're going to get judged. But when I'm at work, I talk to them. I a lot of times I'll tell them my story. Well, I struggled with that too, and this is what I used to do, and so I understand. And then they just don't really feel as judged, and I find that they're more willing to be open, and then they're more open to to advice or to
yeah,
guidance.
I can understand that. Yeah,
Yeah, it does work
So
really,
what?
really well.
So what made you? I'm not changing subject here. I'm just moving slightly. What made you decide to become a dietitian in the first place, and how long ago was that?
So I
Because
qualified.
you've got an applied science degree or something, or you've got some qualifications.
Well, yeah, quite a few at this point. So I have 3 degrees technically, but the main ones are
Bugger me, you're one of those psycho degree guys. Yeah.
I'm just a massive nerd. The main ones. So I did
Yeah.
sports science as an undergrad. And to be honest, I went. That was when I was 25. I turned 40 in a few weeks. So a fair old while ago. But I went into sports science because as a teen, I was fat and, doing a lot of comfort eating for various reasons. And I just wanted to try to figure that out, and I figured, well, if I go and study sports science, I'm going to get the answers that I want. And that was literally I know it sounds odd, but that was my motivation. So I remember I called up the university, Loughborough University. I called them up on Thursday and I said, have you got any spaces? And they were like, come on Friday and have an interview. So I went on Friday, had an interview. I say that I managed to blag my way onto the course because at this point, I didn't finish school. I have no GCSEs, never went to college. So I was having this interview, trying to get on a university degree. And the lady's question to me was like, listen, everybody on this course has A-levels and all of this kind of stuff, but you don't. So why should we let you on? And I'd taken my backpack with me to this interview, and I opened my backpack, emptied all the books out onto the table, and I was like, look, this is what I'm reading for fun. And it was all like sports nutrition, physiology, and all these kinds of books. And I was like, I'm trying to figure this stuff out by myself. I said, I don't know what everybody else is like, but if they are this motivated, then, so am I. And thankfully she let me on.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I went into sports science. I really wanted to be a physiologist because I love physiology. And even now, that's how I approach nutrition. It's not just about the food stuff. It's about how the food interacts with your body. That's the lens I view it through. But then...
And incidentally, I guess just about every other kid in your class was a keen sports person, because it's natural for someone in sports to want to do sports science as a progression of their hobby.
Yeah, they were all elite athletes. And when I say elite athletes, so they were all, I was 25 at the time, obviously a mature student, if you like. Everybody else was like 18, 19, 20 years old, max. But they were all they were playing for England badminton team, England rugby team, England football team, England triathlon.
Yeah.
They were all these kinds of people. I was none of that. And so that's why I went there. And then anyway, during the course, obviously I learned a ton of stuff, of course. But, I got some advice from one of the lecturers who just said, look, there aren't many physiology jobs around in the country. There's maybe 5 or something, that work in elite sport. It's just not a huge thing.
Yeah.
So you might want to rethink. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I knew, I was very good at the nutrition stuff. It just clicked for me. I still don't really know why. It just did. And she said to me, look, why don't you have a think about dietetics? And I remember saying to her, well, what's that? And she was like, well, it's like nutrition stuff, but you do it in hospitals and that kind of setting. And so she introduced me to a dietitian. I didn't know what a dietitian was at that time. And yeah, that's how I found out about it. And then after my undergrad, then I did a postgrad did biochemistry, and then I did master's level dietetics. To get into that space.
You did biochemistry at postgrad. I did biochemistry in second year of my applied science degree, and it was a very bloody difficult
Yeah,
paper to
it
do.
was hard. Yeah. I'm not going to lie, it was hard. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It was one of my least favorite topics, I must admit, because it was just so, I mean, the concept behind it was amazing of this is what's happening at a cellular level, but
yeah.
the ins and outs of it were just way beyond my brain power at that stage of my life.
Yeah, I remember my dissertation for that was I had to do like some experiment using electrophoresis, I think that's how you say it. And honestly, I barely knew what was going on at the time. So I wrote this dissertation, and I was writing it. I just like, I don't really understand what's going on here, but I'm just going to write some. I passed it somehow, but yeah, it was super hard. So that's why dietetics, though. So to answer your question, is I just wanted to do the nutrition stuff, and I needed a job. And dietetics was the route. And then obviously coming into dietetics, and you realize the profession is like 90% women, which is an interesting dynamic, and that's where I've been. So in 2014, I qualified, entered the NHS, worked for the NHS for like 4 years, set up my own business, did that for like 6-7 years, maybe 6 years, I think. And then obviously lockdowns crushed that. And then, I'm back at the NHS now. So bit of a journey.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. How do you find the difference between working on your own and working with the NHS customers, or what do they call clients? I guess we would
I call them
people
patients.
Patients. Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the people that you deal with it's a different level of individual, and I don't mean that to sound like judgmental or negative, but when you're working privately, I don't know who's listening to this, but maybe there's personal trainers, fitness coaches, whatever. But when you're working privately, you're dealing mostly with people that can afford to spend a lot of money to get some help. And these people are just naturally more motivated. They might have already have read 10 books and did it, all these kinds of things. So they're actively motivated and seeking answers, and you're willing to do stuff. On average, the people that we get in the NHS are, and it's not everybody, that's why I say on average, but they are, less motivated, I would say. They are lower income people, I would say, so we get a lot of, at least I do in the work that I do in primary care, I interact with a lot of people that are on benefits, or a lot of elderly people, a lot of care home type work. Obviously, do kind of deal with it like a lot of nurses, and you do come across professional people that need help as well.
Okay.
But I would definitely say the bulk of people are, for various reasons, just not motivated. Maybe even don't even feel like their health is in their control. A lot of sort of learned helplessness type stuff going on, I think.
Yeah. So you're potentially having to get them to change their diet. You're potentially having to change their whole lifestyle, their whole everything, their whole persona.
Massively, yeah. I mean,
and also how they react to all of their family and relatives who are probably in the same boat. And if they make a change, it's like, why do you think you're better than us or something? What's going on here?
Yeah, definitely. And this is why it's so hard, And so I had a student with me the other day, a student dietitian, and I was telling him that, like, when you work in healthcare, as a dietitian, at least, I can only speak to my experience, but the GPs will probably have similar, that when you're newly qualified, you think that you have all this knowledge and you just need to educate people and give advice. That's what you think. But when you gain some experience, you realize actually your job is to help people figure out what their main barriers are and how they overcome those. It's not actually the advice bit, because for the most part, people either know what to do. Like mostly I would say people know what to do. There are some clinical conditions, of course, like, PCOS and these kinds of things that can be, people don't know what to do because it's not common knowledge. But, when we're talking about like weight management, diabetes, even mental health stuff, I have patients tell me that, I know I need to drink less alcohol. Oh, I know I shouldn't drink 30 cups of coffee a day. Oh, I know I should go to bed. So then, of course, the conversation is spent, well, okay, so why aren't you doing those things? And people come up with all sorts of stuff, and To be fair, I would have as well, like, 5-10 years ago or whatever. But people say all sorts of stuff, like, oh, like, I lost my mum 10 years ago and I'm still struggling with it, and my job's really stressful and I don't know what to do, and all of these. So you end up, I do anyway, you end up feeling much more like a counselor than.
I was going to say, you're basically a diet-based shrink.
That's how it seems sometimes, which is interesting because obviously you spend so many years learning about nutrition only to realize you probably should have studied psychology.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is amazing though, to be fair, because even though for all the reasons I've just said, it is an uphill battle a lot of the time, when you do get the wins, like, it's incredible. And fortunately for me, I get to work in specific specialties that I'm very confident in. And I've spent a long time either working in, or I've experienced those struggles myself and overcome them. So, I feel like I get really good outcomes on a consistent basis. And that, for me, is what keeps me going back to work, even though it is very stressful. It is, the NHS expect the world from you. They don't give you much in terms of resources. But that's, when you get those wins, that's when you come home feeling like, okay, like it was worth it today, because, you changed this person's life. And, like, for example, I've got patients that were being forced into bariatric surgery because they could not lose weight. And, they end up with me, and I'm thinking of one guy in particular. Now we've, I put him on a low carb diet. He's lost 30% of his weight. He's loving it. He says it's the easiest thing ever. He now doesn't have to have bariatric surgery because the doctors can see, like, oh, actually, he can do this. And, for him, though, it's not to say that bariatric surgery is a bad option. It's a valid option for many, but this particular guy did not want to have surgery at all. And so when you get those kinds of wins, then, yeah.
Well, that's right. And I'm sure he's feeling a hell of a lot better for it in every other respect too.
Oh, 1,000,000%. I mean, he was on medications for all sorts, like acid reflux. He was on pain medication for his knees. He's not on any of those things now. His diabetes medication's all reducing. And that's where it's about.
And again, really. The feeling of achievement from him must be huge as well. He's thinking, hey, I did this on my own. I'm not relying on this bariatric thing.
Definitely.
I've done this on my own, and therefore I can continue to do it. I can continue to get better and better and better.
Definitely, yeah.
That's quite amazing.
Yeah, I mean, same for any of us, though, right? Like, at one point in your life, you just kind of, you feel like ill health is just something that happens to you, but, and then when you get those initial wins, you change your lifestyle, and then you realize, oh, wow, it actually is in my control. If I sleep well, if I exercise, lift weights, go for a walk, eat decently, then, once you realize it is in your control, I think that's when the penny drops then, and you're off to the races, even with NHS patients.
Okay.
But it's getting them there, though. It's getting them to buy into, actually, this is in your control. Like I tell everybody, like most of the conditions I deal with at work are what are categorized as lifestyle diseases. Things like heartburn, acid reflux, diabetes, things like IBS, obesity, etc., lifestyle diseases. And so the very first thing I tell everybody to try to get them on the right page is the clue as to what the solution might be is in the name. If you have a lifestyle disease, that means your lifestyle has become diseased. So if you change your lifestyle, then we stand a good chance things will at least improve. If not, could go away.
Yeah, okay. This is just a quick intermission in the middle of this. I hope you're enjoying this podcast. While I'm here, can I suggest, if you like this podcast, I'll have other guest speakers on as well in the future. Why not subscribe? So at the end of the podcast, if you go on to my channel and just hit subscribe, see your toes again. Incidentally, also, if you're interested in the subject of keto diet and how it affects, obviously, mental health as well as physical, I have a book that I've written all about this. It's about 200 pages long. It's on Amazon. It costs a bit less than 10 British pounds. And it's called See Your Toes Again as well. So if you read that, you'll find that that'll give you the step-by-step process of how to do it. So thank you for listening so far, and I hope you keep enjoying it. So the next big question then is, you became a dietitian, and then at some stage, of course, you decided to really walk out on that plank and probably have a lot of knives behind you so you can't walk back, and you decided to become low carb.
Yeah.
So I mean that takes balls for a start, because I think it's the same with a lot of doctors who may see the benefits in a low carb attitude, but they know that if they start suggesting that sort of thing to their patients, there's a chance if anything went wrong, they could end up in a power of shit. So they stick to what they know and stick to what they've been taught. Here you've gone and you've been taught one religion, and now you've gone off and you're starting to preach another religion.
So that's one way to put it.
I think that's actually possibly a pretty good analogy, if I say so myself.
Yeah, I mean, look, people can be religious about these things. The low carb space, it has its fanatics, if you like. Fasting does, or every diet modality has its fanatical group that think this is the only way, and every other way must therefore be wrong. That is, of course, not true. We know a variety, especially when it comes to weight loss, right? Like, we know all of the diets work, like all of them, as long as you can stay consistent. If you want to factor in health, that's a slightly different conversation. So we know like a variety of options can work, but like, as for me, I'm not religious about it, never have been. Coming from a sports science background, I've always really just been interested in the physiology of it, but then the outcome, right? So it's like, I want to achieve this outcome over here. How do we make the guy run faster, for example? How do we make the cyclist run faster, or be able to do it 10 times a week instead of 2 times a week? How do we do that? And that's kind of the vibe you get taught in sports science. There's no politics. There's no, you have to do this because Boris Johnson said. There's none of that in sports science. So that's where I came from. And I've always maintained that attitude of, and I say this in work all of the time, like, I'm here for the patients. I'm here to help my patients achieve outcomes. However I need to do that, that's what I'm going to do. Now, you are right in that, like, the average dietitian will only do like the Eat Well plate. They'll follow the grain-based, politicized nutrition recommendations. They will only follow the NICE guidelines, for example. But the thing with all of that is, say, like, the NICE guidelines are usually years behind, and there are, of course...
What are the NICE guidelines?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So the NICE guidelines are sort of on a... How do I explain? So you've got, like...
I guess NICE stands for something?
Yeah, so it's like Center of Excellence or something. But basically, they're kind of like on a international level. They write these guideline documents, which are supposedly, a group of doctors will sit down, review all of the evidence, and then make recommendations based on the evidence. And so don't get me wrong, it's a brilliant starting point. If you encounter a clinical condition that you know nothing about, it's a brilliant starting point to go, okay, cool. Like, that's what they're saying. So that's my starting point. But in my experience, the NICE guidelines are usually quite a few years out of date. So, and then, of course, more lately, you've got the NICE guidelines being infiltrated by pharmaceutical companies. So we know now that GLP-1 drugs are recommended for use in obesity when they never used to be. Interestingly, the NICE guideline document that was produced that said, okay, doctors can now prescribe this for obesity, that was sponsored, and I put it in air quotes because it was sponsored by the company that produces all of the GLP-1 drugs. Which is an issue for me, because we know from other research that pharmaceutical industry research is more likely to find its products favorable and obviously, present its products in the most positive light. And that's what we've seen with the GLP-1 drugs. So everybody's running around, and I talked about this at an obesity conference at the start of January this year. All these doctors are running around going, oh yeah, GLP-1s are amazing, put everybody on GLP-1 drugs. What they're missing out is in the appendix of all of that research, they found that people that take GLP-1 drugs for weight loss, 40% of the weight they lose is muscle mass.
Oh, God.
Now that, you think about the diabetes, I'm not sure if epidemic or pandemic is the word to use. Absolute shitstorm is what's going on with diabetes. It's going through the roof. We know that muscle, if somebody has more muscle, like muscle is a glucose disposal sink, you can think of it, because your body can store carbs inside your muscle as glycogen if you obviously exercise. So the fact that we're going to have, literally probably millions of people running around in the next 5 or 10 years with 40% less muscle than they originally had, to me, I'm like, are we just creating even more diabetics potentially? And this is what I talked about at the obesity conference I presented at in London in January. And my suggestion to them was look, you're just running around saying it's good for obesity because that's what you read in the NICE guideline document, which was produced by the pharma company, but they're not telling you 40% of the weight loss is muscle mass. So if you're going to put a patient on these drugs, you at least need to tell them to eat more protein, go and lift some weights or do some weight bearing movement, use your muscles so that hopefully you can minimize the muscle loss. And yeah, so the point being with that sidetrack story anyway is the guideline documents, there's various issues with them, or there can be, they can be out of date. So as a healthcare professional, if you are looking to help your patients achieve better outcomes, it stands to reason, and this is what I do. I'm not saying I'm perfect at it, but you go off researching your own, right? Trying to find better answers, better solution. It's right, if we're doing X, and, so for example, in the NHS right now, the average diabetic patient has a HbA1c of anything between 7 and 8%, which is incredibly high. They're also, on average, on what we call triple therapy, which is they're on 3 or more drugs, all of which, they're all different drugs, but they all do the same thing. They're all trying to reduce your blood sugars via different mechanisms, but they're on 3 or more of these drugs. Jesus. So that's the average patient. So of course, somebody like me is going to look at that and go, right, that's what we've got, and this is what we're doing. Off I go down the rabbit hole, trying to find first trying to understand the physiology, and then trying to find some research of, is there anything else we could be doing? Oh, and surprise, surprise, there turns out there is, because low carb has been a thing for 30 or 40 years. It's very well researched. It's an evidence-based, safe way that people can achieve normal blood sugars. We've got Dr. David Unwin in 2021 or 2022 published a massive study from his GP surgery showing that at least anywhere between 50 and 70% of people that go on a low-carb diet, as soon as they're diagnosed with diabetes, achieve remission. And they don't, they come off the drugs, etc., etc. Now, the frustrating thing is low-carb within the NHS is still not an accepted thing. It's not talked about. And, that speaks to your point of oh, Mike's walked out on a plank because he's this low-carb dietitian, and dietitians aren't normally that. And it is a frustrating thing because we, as healthcare professionals, the NHS as an organization, dietitians, doctors, all of us, we tell ourselves we are evidence-based practitioners, right? So we run around saying we are evidence-based, yet for some reason we are ignoring an entire base of evidence around low carb and diabetes management, and we're not even offering it to patients. No. And this is why, though, just to finish this off, because what you've said, everybody says to me, well, Mike, you're a dietitian. You shouldn't be saying this stuff about how can you get away with that? And dietitians ask me this. They asked me this all when I presented at the conference. 3 different dietitians came up to me after the conference and they were like, how do you still have a job? And my response was what do you mean? And they were saying you're saying what you're saying, but that is obviously not what we're taught to say. How are you getting away with it? And my response to them is, what I'm saying, though, is based on evidence. So if I get dragged into court tomorrow and they say, well, look, you're doing a low carb diet with these types of patients and you shouldn't be doing it. My question will be, well, look, I can print 30 years of research out for you. It's safe and it's effective. And in fact, it is accepted by different governing bodies within healthcare. So the British Dietetic Association now recognize a low carb diet as an effective way to lose weight and manage diabetes. The American Diabetes Association also recognize it as a valid option. Now, they don't actively promote it, but in their guideline documents, they at least recognize it is a valid option.
Yeah. And let's face it, they don't want to go and acknowledge it too much because it contradicts everything they've said for the last 40 or 50 years, which would be a little bit embarrassing for some people.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. This is the part I struggle with a bit, really, because like it can seem like really conspiratorial, if you like, as to why they don't embrace it more. And of course, we know that, say, for example, the pharmaceutical industry, they produce all the diabetes drugs. They have a financial interest to increase the usage of those drugs. However, for clinicians like myself, the way I like to think about it, and this is maybe the way people can mentally make friends with low carb if they've been very low fat in the past, is I like to think of like this toolbox analogy, right? So I'm not a mechanic or anything of the sort, but if I'm gonna build a car or if I'm gonna build a house, right? If the only tool I've got is a screwdriver or a hammer, right? I'm obviously very, very limited, right? So I want as many tools in my toolbox as possible because then I can make good progress and I'll be able to do the job quite well. Now, in a nutrition sense, the only tool in the average dietitian's toolbox, or, the only tool in the NHS's toolbox nutritionally is a low-fat diet. It's the only tool.
Yep.
Now,
yep.
My issue with that, again, the NHS claims to be a patient-centered organization. Now, patient-centered means we should be respecting the patient's autonomy. We should be respecting the patient's preferences. We should be respecting the patient's cultural differences. And we should really be guiding the patients, not directing and telling them what to do. So that's what we're trained. That's our mandatory training, right? Like the NHS is patient-centered. This is what we should be doing. This is how we should be acting. But the reality of it is, within the NHS, they take their Eat Well guide and they just give it to everybody. Oh, you got cancer? Eat low fat. Oh, you have diabetes? Eat low fat. Oh, you're overweight? Eat low fat. Oh, you have acid reflux? Eat low fat. Oh, you have PCOS? Eat low fat. And they're just, like the only tool they've got is a hammer, and they apply it to everything. And again, for some people, a low fat diet could work perfectly, but it depends on context. It depends on the individual. And in certain clinical situations, a low-fat diet is actually harmful to patients. So, for example, I submitted a different article recently talking about a condition that many women struggle with called PCOS, so polycystic ovary syndrome. And this is a clinical condition where the physiology of it is hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. Now, all that means is your pancreas produces way too much insulin in proportion to what you've eaten. And also, your muscles and your fat cells aren't responding to that insulin as well as they did. So you got this chronic situation of too much insulin, blood sugars going up, etc. So these women gain a ridiculous amount of weight very fast. Now, interestingly, again, in the research, the standard advice for women with PCOS is you need to lose weight. And of course, they go, here's a low-fat diet sheet, go and do that. Interestingly, even if they lose weight, their PCOS doesn't get better. But if you put these individuals on a low-carb diet, then the hormonal issues all reverse. The insulin comes down, and so one thing I didn't mention is in PCOS, when you've got chronically elevated insulin in women, what that does is raise their testosterone levels. And then that prevents them from becoming pregnant, etc. But on a low-carb diet, and you don't even have to go like ketogenic type low. You can just go very moderately low, but you're reducing the carbohydrates in the diet. The insulin comes down, so your pancreas isn't producing as much. Insulin resistance comes down. Of course, you lose weight, but the testosterone comes down. And then hormonally, everything rebalances, and many of them can get pregnant at that point. Now, do you know what I mean? And that's kind of my point to anybody that is any clinician, dietitian, nutritionist, doctor, nurse, or whoever is just like, but this is why I get really wound up when they just write off low carb. Oh, no, that's stupid. You don't need to do it. Well, actually, there are certain clinical conditions where it necessitates low carb, like PCOS. Diabetes is definitely one. And it's emerging now. Like I said, we talked about the mental health at the start of this call. Eventually, I think in 10, 20 years' time, we're going to see, ketogenic diets for mental health. It will become an established thing, because that's where it's trending right now, for sure.
Yep. Okay. Now, incidentally, too, on all of that, when we talk about low carb, carbohydrates, of course, are an energy source. I'm talking to your average listener here. So if you're taking out the carbohydrates or the carbs that are your energy source, obviously you have to replace them with something else. Mm-hmm. Would you like to elaborate on that? Since you're the dietitian, I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah, so you're right. So what people need to know is like there's no such thing as an essential carbohydrate. Your body needs a certain amount of glucose to survive. And your body can make that glucose all by itself. This is why if you go to your local library, like if we were to do that now, go to the science section, GCSE science, find the human biology books, and look at the chapters in the index. There is no chapter in any human biology book ever written that says essential carbohydrates for human biology or biochemistry.
And that's really important too, because so many people say, oh, you've got to have carbohydrates because of the glucose. Your brain needs glucose. Okay, that's fine, but your brain can find that glucose.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes, your body can make all the glucose that you need to live, to survive. Also, your brain can run on ketones. So when you eat less carbs, you replace it with fats, fats being things like olive oil, butter, cream. Fats obviously come in, eggs, meat, fish, all these kinds of things. So when fat metabolism goes up, so you're just using fat for energy instead of carbs for energy, a byproduct of that, if your carbohydrates are low enough, is your body will produce something called ketones, and your brain, your heart, various tissues around your body can function extremely well on ketones. And this is such a non-controversial thing. It still confuses me as to why some healthcare people will say, oh, ketosis is dangerous, or, oh, it's, whatever. Because the fact of the matter is, humans would not have survived all of these millions of years without ketones. And we know that to be true. It's just common sense when you think about it. So before agriculture, and agriculture being the growing of wheat, flour, rice, all of these things that make up our modern diet, before all of that, we survived millions of years, right? And definitely in the hunter-gatherer type period, we would have been hunting animals. If you were successful, you would have feasted for days. If you weren't successful, you keep hunting, you keep going. Now, what kept those people going? Well, they were using their stored body fat stores that they had after they were feasting, and they were functioning on, fat metabolism and ketones. That's what kept them going.
That's right. And ironically, they were quite often, of course, during that process, they were fasting full length, for several days sometimes, fasting on a fairly regular basis. And they would have been going, God, my stomach's hungry, but what can I do about it? That damn oxen keeps running away. So,
definitely.
There's times where they have to walk another 50 miles to find the herd of beasts that they're trying to find. So, which happens enough already over in some of these tribes have to spend in Africa and so on, have to spend significant times looking around to try to find their food. It's not just there all the time.
Definitely, yeah. And so the point being of all of that history really is just to point out that ketosis, that, using fat for energy, it's just a normal part of human physiology. It's, take the politics out of it, take, the financial incentives away from nutrition for a minute. It's just a normal part of human physiology. And there's enough research around now that shows there are benefits to all of that. Intermittent fasting, very well accepted. Even in healthcare, they accept now that intermittent fasting has benefits. It was only 10 years ago where people would say, intermittent fasting, that's a scam. Now it's very well accepted, and Same with a ketogenic diet. Same with low carb. It's just using fat for energy. You will have periods where you are in ketosis for various reasons, and you'll have periods where you're not. Now, all of this isn't to say that carbs are the devil, carbs are evil, and they have absolutely zero utility, because that's also not true. However, it depends on the context, I would say. So, for example, again, I come from a sports science background. So if I'm training like an Olympian, right, I'm training twice a day, 6 or 7 days a week, right? And I'm a triathlete, or I'm, I don't know, like doing something that's like really high intensity, right? So we know that when you engaging in really high intensity sort of exercise, your body does rely more and more on glycogen, or the carbs that are stored in your muscles. Now, the reason for that is because when intensity gets high enough, your body actually can't use fats fast enough to produce the ATP, which is the energy currency of the body. It can't break those fats down fast enough to keep up. So then it starts relying on glycogen, which is just the stored carbohydrates in your muscles. So in that context, it actually makes sense. Now, I think there are still benefits to going quite moderate on the carbohydrate intake and having a bit more fat, and there's various reasons for that. But in that context, it makes sense that somebody would have maybe a sort of carbohydrate heavy diet. However, most of us, myself included, I have a sedentary job, and this is what I tell a lot of my patients, is like, why are you eating like an elite athlete when you aren't moving like one?
Yeah.
Right. And myself included,
And
like I lift weights every day. I do about an hour of walking every single day. However, that is still not sufficiently high intensity enough to warrant me eating 500 grams of carbohydrates a day, which is what you would consume if you were to consume a standard westernized diet. You have breakfast cereals and bread and sandwiches and crisps and chocolate. You'd get between 300 and 500 grams of carbohydrates a day without even trying. And that is like, you read any sports nutrition book, and that is like elite athlete type eating.
That's right. And this is where you get a lot of anti-keto, anti-carnivore, anti-low carb people will say, it doesn't give you the high intensity exercise that you need. It's like how many of us need that? Yeah. How many of us go for 400 meter sprints every day? How many of us are training as sprinters, as anaerobic athletes, athletes that are really burning things to the ground? Even the people who used to don't. So, you've got a few athletes in the world, but it's probably 0.5% at best of the population.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree.
The other one I get all the time, I heard it the other day on another podcast channel, and I was a little bit appalled, to be honest. This so-called doctor was saying, science doctor was saying that one of the other problems with keto is the flu. You'll get the flu. It's terrible. You get headaches, nausea. And I'm thinking, I got that the first time, 5 days in, I think it was 4 or 5 days in, I got it for one evening. I went to the gym and did a great workout, although I felt like crap. I felt like I was coming down with a bad cold. Went home, still felt like shit. Went to bed, woke up, and I had never had as much energy in my world as that morning. And it was the only time I've ever had what they call the keto flu. And then this bloke's rabbiting on as if people who switch to keto are going to have keto flu
like
every
forever,
day,
yeah.
all the time. And it's just absolute crap. And it really, as you can tell, it kind of winds me up. Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say, going back a few steps there, would you say that for the people, for some of the people who are recommending all of those prescriptions for, say, a type 2 diabetic, are they getting paid for that, or is that all part of the NHS? I mean, where's that coming from? Is it easier for them just to say, yeah, here, have this medication, as opposed to let's try to figure it out at a more organic level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm going to try and be really objective here.
Yeah, you noticed how I was kind of stumbling and objective in my question, as opposed to saying what I wanted to say.
Yeah, definitely. So when we look at, obviously people go to the GP, and I'm not sure if many people realize this, but GPs in the UK at least, they're all private businesses, right? So they're all basically consulting type businesses. And so obviously the NHS give them funding to do certain things, right? To deal with in the specific community where they live, to deal with certain conditions and stuff. And so to get that funding, they have to meet what are called QOF targets, QOF. So these QOF targets are publicly available. Anybody, if you Google it, QOF targets, UK GP, it comes up on the NHS website. And if you read them, it's obviously very wordy language, kind of managerial type lingo. But if you read it and break it down, and you can use maybe ChatGPT to do that. But fundamentally, GPs get paid for two things, and this is regardless of the condition, right? So you got the headache, or you go with diabetes, you go with whatever the problem is. They get paid in two cases. They get paid when they prescribe things. Antibiotics, they'll have like statins, they'll get paid more for certain drugs and not for others. The COVID jabs, for example, GPs get paid every time you take a COVID jab, hence why they push it, because they want to get paid, right? So that's the same for most drugs. There probably are some drugs that they don't get paid for. I'm not sure what those are, but the big ones are obvious. Things like statins, insulin, etc. So they get paid for prescribing stuff, and they get paid for referring. So if you walk in there and you're like, look, I'm obese, I'm diabetic, and I don't know, I've got dementia or something, right? They go, okay, well, your cholesterol's high, take a statin, here's some metformin to try, maybe take some orlistat to help you lose weight. And by the way, I'll refer you to a dietitian. Go and speak to Mike. So they get paid for each prescription. And like I said, there will be some prescriptions that don't get paid for, but they also then get paid for the referral. What they do not get paid for, and this is nowhere in writing, what they do not get paid for is if that same individual goes to the GP and the GP says, listen, we'll spend about 3 hours here, and we'll fix your lifestyle. This is mostly lifestyle disease type stuff, so let's sort that out. How's your sleep? Talk to you about your sleep, get you in a better sleep routine. Maybe they advise you on some supplements that you can take to improve your sleep. Things like glycine, melatonin, these things do improve sleep quality. Then talk to you about maybe exercise and why you aren't exercising, and coach you through your barriers. And then maybe they talk to you about nutrition and have you tried a low carb diet? And if they did that, right, like lifestyle coaching type stuff, and then they send you on your merry way. Now they might have fixed all of your issues. You might go away, implement all of that. You'll be sleeping better. You lost a ton of weight. You're exercising. Changed your life. However, in that situation, the GP does not get paid a penny. And so that's, now this isn't to basically talk shit about any GPs, because I know GPs, I'm friends with doctors. They get into their job for the same reason I get into my job, which is I want to help people. We want to see people win. However, the system from a top down is seemingly rigged in a very perverse way, where certain actions are incentivized and certain actions are not. Now, whether that's on purpose or not, I don't know, and I'm not at liberty to say. We can get very conspiratorial about that, and that's a big, deep black hole. All I know is like this is the way it's set up. So this is what they're incentivized to do. So that's why most doctors do what they do. You've also then layered on top, to make all of that worse, the pressures of the NHS. So at the moment, a GP, if you go to your GP today, Pete, you've got 8 minutes with that GP. Eight minutes. Now, right. I consider myself quite good at coaching and communication skills and things like motivational interviewing and CBT and all these behavior change skills. However, I can do nothing in 8 minutes. Absolutely nothing. No. So you've got this perverse financial incentivization type system. You've got all of the pressures, time pressures, stress, etc., all layered on top. And then we wonder why, like GPs aren't, partly just because they're not able. For example, if a patient goes with, maybe they're overweight, they've got high cholesterol. I've had patients like this. The GP will go, okay, here's a statin, come back in 3 months if you've got any issues. Right, and they just leave it at that for all the reasons I've just said. Whereas for that individual, if they are moderately overweight and the cholesterol is only slightly high, if they lose weight, it will come down. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Incidentally, I know it's on a slightly different tangent, but I've got a lady called Sarah Pugh who hopefully will do an interview with me in a couple of weeks, and she's right on about all that sort of stuff, including cholesterol. It's amazing the information that she's got about stuff like cholesterol. So that's in a couple of weeks, hopefully. So really, I mean, that's the other thing. Somebody walks in there. I walk in there. If I was 120 kilos, I'm depressed. I'm overweight. I've got all sorts of things that would suggest, well, okay, they pump up my arm and they find out I got high blood pressure. Let's leave it at that for now. At that stage, the doctor can, like you say, he can spend the next 3 minutes, because he's just used 5, explaining to me about my diet and my lifestyle, or he can say, here's some drugs.
Yeah. And
so I would have thought, and when he looks at me and he thinks, am I wasting my time to give this guy a lecture about his lifestyle, or
yeah, and that's
drugs?
what for me, I would prefer would happen is, and they can't, because I've thought about this, like they can do this within that 8-minute time period. So, like drugs are useful for a lot of people. There are a lot of clinical conditions that, we don't know what's going on. Sometimes the lifestyle stuff doesn't work, or sometimes somebody's not able to make those changes. And that's what the medications, I think, really should be there for. So it's not like an anti-drug thing. But for that GP, like you said, you go in, you're overweight, blood pressure's high, maybe cholesterol's high. They could prescribe the thing, spend 2 minutes doing that, and then I would like them to do some motivational interviewing type stuff, which is a specific process to go through with that. And it can be quite quick. But the first thing is just establishing, well, does this individual have any desire to potentially change their lifestyle? Are they remotely interested? And it's a simple question. So
Yeah.
if I was the GP, it could be like,
that.
okay, listen, Pete, all of the issues you're dealing with are lifestyle related. Is that something, is lifestyle change something that you're interested in finding out more about? And if you say yes, and then my next question might be, well, okay, assuming we can help you change your lifestyle, is that something you're able to do? Like, are you able to ballpark some time to focus on this for the next 6 months? And again, assuming you say, yeah, I could probably do that if I had the right guidance, then all of that doctor would have to do is say, right, I'm going to refer you to X, maybe Mike or another dietitian or wherever. I'm going to refer you to them. They're going to help you with all that lifestyle stuff. And if you can't do that and you can't make it work, then we have these medications here for you that can help. Now, I think if they did that, that would be ticking both boxes at the right time. And I do feel then that consultation would be a lot more productive, because what we know from over 1,000 studies is when healthcare professionals use what's called motivational interview, which is what I just did there, people feel more listened to. People feel, like they have more trust in their healthcare practitioner. They become more open to, at least receiving some sort of advice. And it gets their cogs turning in terms of them thinking, oh, yeah, maybe there is actually something I could do here. So then by the time they get to me or somebody like me, they're already being nudged down that path. And they're open to it.
They're
open and I think that would be a lot more productive. And, we'd probably have a lot more people then talking about lifestyle change and all of that kind of stuff. And again, the drugs are there for the people that can't do those things. The drugs are there for the conditions that can't be improved with a lifestyle, as opposed to just being the go-to thing, really. But that's what I would like in a perfect world. Yeah,
because because I know a lot of people would like to make change, but they've got to a stage in their lives where they are overweight. They might be feeling depressed. They realize they got high blood pressure. They're looking down the barrel of diabetes, and they're thinking, how the hell did I even get here? I used to be fit. Weight was never an issue for the first 30 years of my life, and now look at me. What have I done wrong? And so, of course, then they cut all the fat out of their diet, which is possibly making things even worse. And, they can go down that whole wrong direction in as much as get to a stage where they just got no idea how to climb back out of it. And so that's where what you're talking about is, hey, we can help you out there and get you in the right direction. And, that's what I would like to think that these podcasts help people too. At least they give people an idea of, okay, I can see that I'm in this situation.
Yeah, and that is what happens, to be fair. And I know that because, so this just happened last year, towards the end of last year. So I got invited on a friend's podcast. So he's an addiction worker, if you like, works for the local council, helps people overcome addictions to various drugs, alcohol, etc. So I went on his podcast to talk about my journey with addiction because, I spent a good handful of years just getting drunk every single day. And so I talked on there quite openly about what led me into addiction, why I continued with it for as long as I did, why I resisted help when I did, and eventually what I did to get out of that hole. And an interesting thing happened. So he sent that to some of his clients at work, some of whom were men. And at least a few of them that was the tipping point for them. They heard somebody speaking the language and all of that kind of stuff. And for them, that's what sparked them to be like, actually, I can do this. And then they knuckled down, and then they started that ball rolling. And so that is how it works, which is amazing, really. When he told me that, he's like, "Oh yeah, I sent your podcast to these people, and they're engaging in treatment now. They've stopped drinking, and these guys have they've joined a gym, and because of what you've said, and that's really energizing, and do you know what I mean? And
that's right. Yeah,
and it'll happen for you eventually once your podcast gets big enough, gets circulated enough. Eventually, I have people messaging me on Twitter already. My account's not that big; it's 5,500 people, but already I have people messaging me, DMing me, telling me that thing you wrote last year, I went and implemented it, and actually I lost 30 pounds, or my diabetes got better, that's it's really cool to have that feedback loop then, because it's cool, I'm making a difference here. And it's still only going to be 1% of people that actually do anything with what you put out. However, if you can save one life or improve somebody's, even if it is just one life, it's worth it, right?
That's right. That's right. Exactly. I see we've been chatting for 1 hour and 5 minutes now, so we should probably wrap it up. We could always have a chat.
Yeah, we should do it, man. We should do it. Yeah.
Again, that's Yeah. How can people learn more about you, Mike?
Just follow me on Twitter, on X. I would say I'm on there every day, posting all sorts of crazy shenanigans. Mostly just useful stuff that if people are just starting off with, if they think they might want to try low carb. That's mostly what I talk about because that's my lifestyle. I eat a low carb diet. That's how I keep all my health in check. So people can go there. Follow me there, message me. Happy to help. There isn't, to be fair, I'm not on any other social platforms or anything. So that is the way.
Okay. Well, I'll put your address on X. I'll put it in my show notes. I think that's what these podcasters call them, the show notes. Well, thanks very much for coming on today, and I think everyone might have learnt quite a bit, and it's been great to hear your opinions on everything.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Been good.